Now that you have your new Craig pocket hole jig, you're probably anxious to get started building, but you may be wondering where to start, what kind of project to choose. Well, this bench is a great place to start. It's a great looking, practical project that's actually very easy to put together, even with basic skills. You can see that it's built from a couple kinds of wood, it's painted and stained, and it all goes together really easily with pocket hole joints and standard dimensional lumber that you can buy at any home center. We will take you through the whole process step by step. If you're new to building projects, picking out lumber can be kind of confusing, but it doesn't have to be. This bench is built with boards you can find in any home center. They're dimensional boards, which means they're cut to standard widths and standard thicknesses, so no matter where you shop, you'll find the right boards. The bench just has 5 boards total, 2 1x4s, 2 1x3s, and a wider 1x8 that's used to make the slats. Now, how do you know what species or kind of wood to choose? And that kind of varies by taste and what you want. We wanted the base to have a smooth painted look, so for it, we went with premium pine. It's smooth and free of knots, and it paints up really nice. Now, if you prefer a more rustic look, you can get common pine. It has knots and more imperfections. It's all just a matter of taste. We also wanted that classic hardwood look, so we went with oak for the slats and just applied a clear finish. If you're gonna paint the whole bench though, instead of an oak 1x8, you can just get a pine 1x8. Doesn't make a difference, the size is the same. And with this project, you can change it up a lot. You can paint it to be different colors, you can use different wood species, you can use stain. Whatever you like, you'll build it the same way with standard dimensional boards. One of the first steps in any project is to start cutting the parts to size. Now, in the case of the bench, I'm gonna start with the legs, and they're 18 inches long. So hook the tape over the end, pull it nice and tight, and then make a mark at the 18. Now you're ready to cut the leg to size. Now you can cut the other 3 legs to the same size. And when I say same there's a reason. Yes, they're supposed to be 18 inches, but what if I cut this a little bit too short? It's one of the reasons that when you're building projects, it's a good idea not to just go down the list and cut everything to size all at once. Instead, cut the parts that you need as you need them. There'll be more back and forth, but it gives you some options. In this case, consistency is more important than accuracy. If I'd made the leg a little bit too short, that would be fine as long as I make the other 3 that same measurement. Maybe my bench is a 1/4 inch lower than it's supposed to be, but nobody's gonna know that but me. So take your time when you're marking, take your time when you're cutting, and you'll get good, accurate results. So I'm gonna cut the other 3 legs to size, and then I can make the 2 side rails. With the 4 legs and the 2 side rails cut to length, you can get ready for some bench assembly. And a quick, easy way to build a bench like this is with pocket hole joints. They're easy and they're very strong. And the first step in creating them is setting up your pocket hole jig. I'm using the pocket hole jig 320, and setting it up is really simple. Everything is based on the thickness of your material. And even though these boards are called 1x4s, they're actually 3/4 of an inch thick. You always want to use this actual thickness rather than the stated or nominal thickness when you're setting up the jig. So just slide the material thickness stops until they click in to the 3/4 inch range setting, and then set the stop collar on the Easy Set drill bit the same way. Slide the stop collar until the 3/4 inch mark on the bit shows through the window, and then tighten it down. That's all it takes for jig setup. Couldn't be a whole lot easier. Now the pocket holes are gonna go in the ends of the side rails to join to the legs. So take the jig and make sure that the material thickness stops are tight against the end of the board with 2 drill guides and a spacer in between. The hole spacing is just right for this 1x4. So you can clamp the jig down and you're ready to drill pocket holes. Make sure you have your drill on its high-speed setting and your clutch set for drilling, and you're ready to go. All you need to do is drill until the stop collar contacts the drill guide to make a perfect pocket hole. You can see it's a quick, easy process. With the jig and the drill bit set, the holes are located right where they should be. So now you can go to the other end and then create the holes in the other side rail. With pocket holes drilled, it's tempting to grab some pocket hole screws and start assembly. But before you do, it's a good idea to take time out and sand the parts. Before assembly, you can get to a lot of the surfaces more easily on most projects. Plus, you know that when you're ready for final project assembly, all your pieces are sanded and ready to go. Now, a random orbit sander makes the process very fast and easy. I've installed a 120 grit sandpaper disc on the sander, and because these premium pine boards are nice and smooth, that's all I'll need. And I don't need to go to finer grits for these because they're going to be painted. So, just sand away. As you sand, a lot of times you'll see little lines across the board. They're called mill marks. They're where the board is planed down and it leaves marks. And as you sand, you'll see those lines start to disappear and know that you're down to a nice smooth surface. Now, you also want to sand the edges. But on a narrow piece or a thin piece like this 3/4, it's hard to get the sander to balance up there. So a good trick is to take 2 pieces, 3 pieces, 4 pieces, whatever it is, and stack them side by side. Now, you've got enough surface area to support the sander, plus you're sanding 2 pieces in this case at the same time. It's a good idea to sand both faces and both edges of your boards, even the inside edges that may not show or the inside faces that may not show. You'll get better results and you'll have a nicer project if you take time to sand them. And the random orbit sander can take care of the faces and the edges. But there's one more thing. The corners will be very sharp, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they can be a little bit sharp to the touch, and that hard edge will have a harder time taking paint and stain as well. So you just want to slightly ease or round off those edges. And you can do that with a piece of sandpaper by hand. Just fold it over the edge and run it back and forth. And really all it takes is a few passes. You'll still have a corner that looks great, but it's just got that little bit of sharpness taken off of it for a much nicer looking result. With the pieces sanded, now you can get out those pocket hole screws and attach the legs to the rails. Just like everything else with pocket hole joinery, screw choice is based on the thickness of your material. And for 3/4 inch thick boards, you'll use an 1 1/4 long screw. You'll also want to choose a coarse thread screw for pine, which is a softwood. Coarse thread screws are aggressive and they'll bite well and hold well in these soft woods. All you need to do is bring the 2 pieces together. Because pocket hole joints are so strong, you don't even need glue. You can use it if you want, but it's not mandatory. The screws add plenty of strength. Line the pieces up, and then it's a good idea to clamp them down, which prevents the pieces from moving as you drive in the screws. Make sure you have your drill set at its lowest speed setting and that it's set to drive screws with a clutch setting that won't let you overdrive them. Then you can just drive the screws home. You want to be sure to hold the drill at the proper angle, but the pilot hole will help you feel what that is. By setting the clutch, I don't have to worry about overdriving. The clutch just slips when the screw's tight. And that easily, you've got a nice strong joint that's not going anywhere. So now you can attach the other legs to the rails. I've gone ahead and cut the next parts to size, drilled the pocket holes, and got them sanded and ready to install. And those are the rails that will go between the two seat assemblies to join them together. There's two kinds. There's bottom rails that have pocket holes in each end. They'll go down here on the legs. Then there's seat rails that have pocket holes in each end, plus pocket holes along the edges that'll be used later to attach the seat slats, and those will get positioned up here along the upper rail. Now, you can see if I position this about where it's supposed to go, that these rails are going to be located 3/4 of an inch down from the edge and at certain spacing along the length of the assembly. So unlike this leg to side rail joint where you can just align the pieces at the end and the edge, here, you don't know exactly where they need to go because there's no edge to align to. So it's worth taking time to do a little bit of layout and make some marks exactly where the pieces are going to go. That way you can install them where they need to be. And it's not tough. You just need the tape measure and pencil again. And this is where the combination square comes in really handy. And I'll show you how. Now, I know that the bottom rails and the outer seat rails are going to be 1 3/8 inches in from the outer end. So I'm just going to make some marks at that point. Again, take your time. Make sure you're not going to 1 5/8 instead of 1 3/8 or something like that. There's another one, 16 1/8 in here. I'll make the same marks at the other end quickly, but not so quickly that I get in a hurry. So now I know where those are going to go, and I know that the rails need to be 3/4 of an inch down from the upper edge here. So I could measure 3/4 of an inch and make a mark at each point, but there's an easier way, and that's with the combination square. I can set it so that the rule sticks out 3/4 of an inch from the head. Then just come along and make a mark across at each one of my seat rail locations. Super easy, accurate, and consistent. Now I'm going to slide the rule down and come in and make a line right where I measured that seat location. So without a lot of hassle, I'm getting super accurate layout marks. A lot of times I like to even put a little X in the area where the piece will get placed, because now I know when I put this seat rail in place, if I align it with those marks, it will be at the proper distance down from the edge, and it'll be square, so everything will sit right when I put it together. So I can finish up the marks for the lower rails and do the same thing to the other assembly, and I'll be ready to start putting this base together. It takes a few minutes to make these layout marks, but it's well worth the time because now I know I can attach the rails exactly where they need to be. With the seat rails, before you screw them in, make sure that these pocket holes on the upper edge are positioned properly so that you can drive in a screw to attach the seat slats later. Now, the layout marks show me exactly where the rail will go, but I need a way to clamp it. You could throw a long bar clamp across here to hold it in place, but if you build very many projects with pocket holes, you'll want to check out a specialty clamp, the right angle clamp. It has a pin that slips into the pocket hole, allows you to position the piece, and then lock it in place exactly while you drive in the adjacent screw. pretty slick because now that's in the exact right position, didn't go anywhere, and I can add this screw. And then I'll just continue on adding the rest of the rails. With all of the rails attached to one side assembly, now I can attach it to the other side. But it's not easy to put that piece up here and try to drive in the screws. It's much easier to lay the second side assembly down and then flip this one on top of it. Now, I don't have to worry about lining every joint up to get started. If I just get it approximately in position, use my right angle clamp again to lock down the first joint. Let me move it back here. Now I can get the clamp to get a good grip and lock it down. So again, it's a huge advantage to have those layout lines. So I'm going to drive this screw in. And before adding the second one, I'm just going to jump down here and get this joint in place. Lock it down, and drive in the screw. Now I'll proceed the rest of the way along to get the bench base put together. After attaching the rails between the side assemblies, I added one more piece, and that's this long stretcher that spans between the lower rails. That adds a lot of strength to the bench. With the rails connecting the side assemblies, I don't have to worry about the bench pushing apart that way. And with the stretcher in there, that adds a lot of strength so it can't push apart lengthwise under the weight of people sitting on it. So, all the parts are in. By taking time, cutting them well, measuring well, and doing some layout, I know that they're all exactly where they need to be. Everything's sanded, so this bench base is ready to paint. To get a great quality paint finish on a project, there's a few simple things you can do. The first is to wipe the project down well. That way, you'll get all the sawdust off that could gum up your paint. The second is to use good painting tools. Don't buy the cheapest paint, buy decent paint, use a good brush, and for projects like this that have large flat areas, you can save time and get a better finish by using a paint roller, but not the kind of paint roller you'd use on your walls. These small foam rollers don't have that nap that leaves an orange peel finish like you actually want on a wall. Instead, as you roll on, they leave a finish that's nice and smooth and will even out even more as the paint dries. Obviously, the rollers can't reach everywhere, so I like to use the brush to work in around those tight areas. Spread the paint out well so that you can come in and roll behind it. Now, another thing that's nice with painted projects, these pocket holes in the bottom rails, they're really not going to show that much when the project's done, but with just a little bit of paint, you can fill those pocket holes in and make them pretty much disappear. The last parts of this bench to make are also the simplest, the seat slats. They're just two pieces of 1x8 oak. It was one board, cut it into 2 equal lengths, and that's it. No pocket holes, no anything. One difference with these is because I'm applying a clear finish, I wanted them nice and smooth, so they'd really shine and really be smooth to the touch. So the boards were pretty smooth from the store, and I started with 120 grit sandpaper, just like on the base. But on the base I stopped because I was going to paint. Here, I went 1 grit finer or less coarse, smoother sandpaper, and I went to 180 and then went over the boards again to get them ready for finish. I decided not to stain because I like the color of the oak as it is, and I wanted something that would bring out that warm tone but still be really easy to apply. And for that, I chose a gel polyurethane. You can see that it's thick. It's a gel. It doesn't run off like a liquid would. That makes it really super easy to apply too. You can wipe it on with a rag, or I like to use a foam brush. And it's pretty forgiving to apply. It's not like a lacquer or something where you hear about, how tough a finish is. With this, you just start out by wiping it on pretty generously. You can already see that color start to pop out. And with a little bit of wiping, you can get that finish evenly distributed. Of course, you'll want to do the edges too, and the ends. But once you've covered the whole surface, you'll probably have some excess on there. And it's a gel, so it's not really going to soak in like a liquid would. So now I'll use my foam brush almost like a squeegee and come in with some nice long strokes to take off the excess. Make sure you get anything that runs over the end and kind of globs up. I'd of course come back and do the edges completely. And that's it. Now you can let this dry and see how beautiful that's going to be. I mean, that's a great color and a classic look, and it'll contrast really nicely with the paint. One thing though, you'll probably find that when this first coat dries, it may actually look a little bit dull. That's okay. Just wipe on a second coat the same way. If you want to build a little more luster, you can even add a third coat after that one dries. But usually 2 coats with this works great, and you'll have a beautiful natural wood finish that's really easy to apply. When the finish and the paint are dry, you can bring the bench together by dropping on the slats. And you can see a couple of things. First, you can see why I painted the base and finished the slats before putting them together. Obviously, this would be really hard to do with the pieces both in place. Second, you can see how cool it looks. The natural finish and the bright paint contrast really nicely and create a great look. Now the slats go in here with some spaces in between, and you could try to measure that out, but honestly, this is a point where I trust my eye. I can tell when those are in place evenly. So now I can attach them. I'm going to pull this one off because I can re-gap it easily enough, using those pocket holes in the edge of the seat rails. The only difference here is that I'm going to use a different screw. Still 1.25 inches long because I'm using 3/4 inch material, but in this case it's a fine thread screw. I used coarse threads for the softwood pine base, but oak is a hardwood. It's a lot more dense, and those coarse threads that are on the coarse thread screws could split the wood. The fine threads are much less aggressive. They still offer great holding power, but they won't risk splitting the wood in hardwoods. All you need to do is drive them in from underneath. Nothing wrong with double checking your gaps as you go. You'll actually be able to tell with hardwoods that the drill has to work a little harder to drive those screws in. It shows you the difference in the wood density and the reason for using a different screw. After final assembly, it's worth taking a minute to really stand back and be proud of your work. I mean, look what you can do. Now, you have what you need to create great projects. Some good advice, some helpful tips, and most of all, your Craig pocket hole jig.